Welcome back to the CFO Strategy Brief from CSO Sandbox. If you have been following this series, you'll know that in recent episodes, we've been building an argument about strategy under uncertainty. In Series 9, we explored how CFOs keep strategic decisions clean, think across past, present, and future, and increasingly act as orchestrators of the strategy system rather than just custodians of financial control. In Series 10, we asked why strategy breaks, why fixed plans are no longer enough, and why organisations need a more living, adaptive, regenerative approach to strategy. This episode is a practical extension of that argument. Welcome, my name is Paul Hunter. In this episode, we follow the story of Chez Lange, a design-led furniture division with a flagship store in Brighton, UK. Brighton's a seaside city on the southeast coast of England. On the surface, it is a retail story. Beneath that, it is really about what happens when a design-led business is governed as if it were a standardised volume business, and why third wave strategy matters when value depends on judgement, responsiveness and coherence, rather than just scale and control. In our work, third wave strategy is the next step in the practice of corporate strategy, treating strategy as a profession with a system and standards to match. In simple terms, it means treating strategy less as a fixed plan and more as a living system of prosponse and response together. The proactive exploration of possible futures and the disciplined reaction to what actually happens, both governed explicitly and held to the same standard of judgment under uncertainty. Third wave strategy does not elevate one above the other. It says that response and prosponse are equal, complementary modes of strategic work, and that both deserve structure, visibility, and accountability, rather than one being overprivileged and the other structurally suppressed by reactive pressures. Increasingly, this kind of system was being operationalised through platforms such as our own Power BI-enabled Strategaia Strategy Navigator app. So what about the business, Chez Lange? Chez Lange was a 14-store division of Cremorne Holdings operating across the UK. It had some genuine strengths. It worked with a local centralised manufacturing partner, which meant shorter lead times and faster delivery than many larger competitors could offer. It could provide bespoke designs within limits, enough flexibility to create differentiated value, but bounded so that cost and complexity remained manageable. And it had access to some of Europe's finest fabric houses, expensive but highly attractive to architects, designers and quality-conscious customers. This was not a commodity retailer in the narrow sense. It was a design-led business whose value proposition depended on combining local responsiveness, controlled customization, and premium material choice into a credible client experience. However, there was an uncomfortable commercial truth in this category. At one level, sofas, the prime value creation engine behind Chez Lange's success, were a commodity. Price mattered. Many customers compared aggressively, and a chain brand with a heavy online presence could almost always win on headline price. In Brighton, that was exactly what happened. A competing chain's brand store entered the market, backed by stronger online visibility and a local outlet that functioned more as a visibility device than as a deep, design-oriented service environment. Chez Lange was never going to be that competitor on price alone. There was another dynamic that mattered here. Most people replaced a sofa only occasionally, perhaps every 10 years or so. That meant the economics of repeat patronage were very different from categories where customers bought frequently. Future demand depended less on habitual return visits and more on recommendations, remembered experience, architect referrals, and the quiet inclination to go back to the same store if the first experience was good. Judgment at the point of engagement mattered enormously, because it shaped not only that day's sale, but tomorrow's reputation. On that basis, they could not afford a crisis. They got one anyway. By late 2025, the division had entered a period of steep decline. Revenue fell sharply across multiple locations. Designer engagement dropped, architect referrals slowed, several stores needed financial support just to remain viable. The sharpest evidence appeared at the Brighton flagship, where revenue fell from roughly £333,000 per month to under £60,000 in a relatively short period after the new competitor arrived. The first explanations were predictable. Management looked at pricing, product alignment, marketing execution, and even salespeople's performance, just as many organisations would do. A visible performance problem appeared, and the instinct was to assume that execution had failed. But the pattern across the network suggested something deeper. The decline was too consistent across very different operating contexts to be explained simply by weak local execution. Something structural was going on. The group CFO reframed the issue at a divisional level, arguing that the real problem was not poor execution as such, but a failure of governance and strategic judgment. To see why, we need to take a step back. Cremorne Holdings operated two very different businesses in its furniture portfolio. One was Loungeabout, a centralised, efficiency-driven volume business optimised for scale, standardisation and throughput. The other was Chez Lounge, a decentralised, design-led division in which value was created through local judgment, bespoke solutions, designer expertise, and long-term relationships not only with customers, but with architects and interior designers. Conceptually, the distinction between the two business models existed. Practically, it was not protected. Over time, governance practices designed for Loungeabout, centralised decision rights, standardised offerings, longer approval cycles and tighter head office control, were progressively extended across Chez Lounge. At first, this looked like stronger control. In reality, it weakened the very conditions Chez Lounge needed in order to function as a design-led business. Local autonomy, timely response, visibility of consequences, and informed judgment at the point of customer engagement. Designers could no longer respond meaningfully to context. They had less room to use the local manufacturer intelligently. They had less ability to shape bounded bespoke solutions, and they were less able to use the fabric story as part of a differentiated value proposition. When the low-price competitor arrived, Chez Lounge faced that threat not only with a price disadvantage, but with its own distinctive capabilities, partially disabled. This is where the story starts to illuminate why third-wave strategy really matters. Under a second-wave strategic management mindset, the typical response from senior leadership is to analyse, decide, cascade, and execute. Strategy is treated as a plan. Management's job is seen to enforce alignment around that plan. But in a design-led business, where value is shaped through situated judgment rather than standardised throughput, that way of thinking on its own breaks down. The problem at Chez Lounge was not simply that management chose the wrong plan. The deeper issue was that the conditions for sound strategic judgment had eroded. If you imagine strategy as a system, it runs through a flow. Signals come in. You enter prosponse, exploring what those signals might mean across multiple possible futures. You respond to what is actually happening in the business. You evaluate options and govern movement into decision. You keep a record of those decisions and assumptions, and you stay in dialogue as conditions change. At Chez Lounge, those stages had collapsed into each other, which is why judgment started to fail. Signals were reduced to operational symptoms. Prosponse was bypassed. Response was largely reactive and ungoverned. Movement into decision was neither clearly governed nor made explicit. Strategic memory was weak or absent. Assumptions stayed vague and implicit. Alternatives were not properly surfaced. Trade-offs were hidden and the coherence of choice was not tested. As a result, the strategy ceased to operate as a living system of judgment. Instead, it became a set of commitments formed too early under the wrong governance logic and without a disciplined way of testing coherence. This is not just a furniture story, it is a strategy practice story. And that's where third wave strategy comes back in. It starts from a different place than traditional strategic planning and second wave strategic management. It treats strategy as a professional practice run on a living system of governed judgment under uncertainty, not as a static plan or an annual document that ignores uncertainty and sets cold hard targets that became irrelevant 2 weeks after the document was written. Third wave strategy says you must create a protected space for both prosponse and response before commitment. Space to explore possible futures, and space to react intelligently to what is actually unfolding without collapsing straight into premature decision. Movement from thinking to decision has to be governed explicitly. Trade-offs must be visible, and decisions need to be preserved in memory so learning and adaptation can occur without strategic drift and so that the coherence of choices over time can be examined. From a CFO perspective, this kind of strategic intelligence system improves decision quality by separating prosponse and response from the movement into decision, governing when and how commitment is made and when you switch between modes, making trade-offs explicit and preserving the logic and assumptions behind decisions over time. The objective is not to hold decisions about the future accountable for outcomes that could not be known, but to ensure discipline in how those decisions were formed. That is exactly what Chez-Lange lacked when the crisis broke. The intervention that followed was not a conventional turnaround program. It did not start with a cost-cutting exercise or a heroic new marketing campaign. Instead, the organisation set out to repair the strategy system. In early 2026, the group introduced a division-wide autonomy and accountability covenant. This re-established local authority over inventory, pricing within defined limits, marketing activity and designer-led engagements. It also significantly reduced decision cycles, allowing responses in days rather than months. Local autonomy was not restored as a romantic gesture towards empowerment. It was restored because the business model required judgment to be exercised, where knowledge, customer context, and consequences were richest. At the point where clients, designers, and the local manufacturer actually met. At the same time, governance did not disappear, it became more explicit. The division re-established a clear boundary between prosponse and the movement into decision. Exploration was no longer collapsed into immediate commitment, and multiple possible ways of creating value could be examined without prematurely locking the division into a course of action. Movement into decision required explicit sponsorship. It required accountability for decision logic, surfaced assumptions, and visible trade-offs. Strategic memory was strengthened, decisions and assumptions were recorded and kept visible over time, enabling review, adjustment, and learning. Regular reviews focused not just on results, but on what had been decided, why, under what conditions those decisions might need revisiting, and whether the overall set of choices remained coherent. In effect, Chez-Lange rebuilt the elements of a third wave strategy system: prosponse, response, governed movement into decision, explicit trade-offs, coherence testing, and memory. None of this would have mattered if it had not shown up in commercial terms. Chez-Lange was never going to beat the competing chain on price. Its future depended on leaning intelligently into what the chain could not easily replicate: shorter lead times through the local manufacturer, differentiated but bounded bespoke solutions, stronger fabric stories and design credibility, and a recommendation-rich customer experience built through trust, not discounting. These strengths only became economically meaningful because governance now allowed them to be used coherently. If local designers could not shape solutions, the local manufacturer would be underused. When decision cycles were too slow, short lead times became strategically irrelevant. If every response had to conform to a standardized volume logic, premium fabric access would become an expensive adornment rather than a value-creating capability. Third wave strategy mattered here because it allowed those capabilities to be connected and recombined in a live system of strategic judgment. Instead of working from a single, rigid, probable forecast, the division could work from a set of coherent, financially viable possible futures that could be explored, tested for coherence, and then committed to under governance. As these conditions were restored, the division was stabilised, revenue improved across locations, designer engagement recovered, architect partnerships were re-established, the Brighton store returned to sustainable performance, and the division regained financial stability. The point is not that the organisation won and could now relax. The point is that Chez Lange re-established the conditions under which judgment could continue to operate under uncertainty. It regained the ability to move coherently from prosponse into decision to response intelligently as conditions changed, and to adapt those decisions over time. It behaved more like design-led system and less like a constrained retail unit trapped inside the wrong governance model. For CFOs, there is a direct lesson here. In a design-led business, strategic failure often comes less from poor execution than from a breakdown in how judgment is governed. When signals, prosponse, response, movement into decision, and memory collapse into one another, organisations become reactive and brittle. When those distinctions are restored, they regain the ability to examine alternatives, govern commitment, and adapt without losing coherence. Third wave strategy gives you a way of making that system visible and manageable. It frames strategy not as a once-a-year document, but as an ongoing flow of prosponse and response, governed movement into decision and learning. In our own work, systems such as Stratigaia are designed to operationalize this. And as Chez Lange shows, when your business is built on judgment, responsiveness and design, that difference is not theoretical. It is the difference between eroding your distinctive capabilities in the name of control and governing them in a way that lets them compound over time. In the next episode, we look more closely at what it takes to build this kind of strategy system deliberately. We look forward to joining you then. Thank you for listening.